Okay, welcome everyone. I think we're probably going to have a few more people joining us. So I'm just going to take a minute to say hi to everybody. I'm super glad to see all of those familiar names among the participants. I know some of you are going to be registered and watching this later, but some of you are here now. I'm really excited about today's talk because I get to introduce a friend of mine and a fellow alumnus of my master's program as well. Although we did not know each other while we were working on our degrees, we became friends after that. And so here's a couple more I'm gonna let in. I know this is kind of maybe an awkward time during the day, but the benefit and the beauty of Zoom is a bunch of people are going to watch this after we're done, including hopefully some of my students. So if you are one of my students watching this or hanging out here, make sure you stay to the end for the Easter egg. But I think without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. It is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Arin Black, and I am not going to, I want to let Arin have most of the time, so I'm not going to do a lot of, I'm not going to talk very much. My share screen button has disappeared. There it goes. It was completely frozen. So I want to just give you all a quick look at her LinkedIn page instead of going through what would be a quite lengthy and impressive bio. And I can just, if I would just give this a little bit of context, I can say that Arin has done a lot of things and all of them very well in her time. She is a graduate of a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing program with an emphasis in fiction. And she has worked in nonprofits. She has worked in event management. She's worked in fashion. She has worked in government work, and all of that leads up to a little bit of what she's going to talk about today, which is content strategy and some other job opportunities that you may not know about with that are available to you with an English degree and that are quite lucrative jobs, actually. So I am going to go ahead and mute myself and hand it over to Arin, and we'll hear what Arin has to say for us today. And just to let you know, you absolutely can ask questions. Please do as we go along. If you have questions, pop them in the chat. We'll grab those questions at the end. I may put in a few more questions myself, and we'll handle questions that way so we don't have to interrupt Arin while she's speaking. We'll get the context of everything, and then we'll go back and see if we can ask a few more things. Okay.
Thank you so much to the Professors Wallace for having me here today. As was mentioned, I am here to talk to you all today because I myself once was an English major, and I'm going to talk to you about a field that you may or may not know about. And so we will get started. I will share my screen. I'm going to do what we always do when we share our screens and confirm that you can see it. Perfect. And then I'm going to just dive right in. So I'm here to talk to you today about careers and content, and really just talking about the idea of how English majors can use your special powers for careers in tech, which is something that for myself as a non-technical person, I had never really thought about before. So I'm kind of new to the field or newish to the field. So we're going to start today talking a little bit about me. I'm going to share some details about what content strategy is and why it matters. Then I'm going to dive into some potential careers within that field and tell you a little bit more about how to get started. As was mentioned, do feel free to put some questions in the chat. While I'm talking, I'm not necessarily going to monitor the chat, but there's time at the end. I've made sure we have some time at the end to answer questions, and I'll be able to make sure that I can follow up if there's questions that we don't get to. I'll also apologize in advance if we hear any noises. I am building a swimming pool and there is someone backfilling my yard as we speak. So let's talk a little bit first and foremost about me. In my current role, I serve as a lead content strategist for Atlassian, which is a software as a service company that builds tools for work management. Some of you may have heard of Jira, Trello, Confluence, Bitbucket, but my role and my goal in that position is simply to make sure that customers have the content they need to use our products effectively, solve their problems, and grow with us. In my time as a content strategist, my work has helped people in a number of ways. And some of those ways may feel familiar to you in some of the work that you've done. So I've helped people get information by designing a trauma-informed content strategy to help people experiencing homelessness get the information they need. I've helped people align by creating a communications strategy that helped enable operations for a $65 million healthcare program. I've helped use content to allow people to access services through an app that let people find Philadelphia Parks and Recreation free or low-cost parks and activities. And I've helped maintain quality by developing digital standards, training, and governance to ensure integrity for a state program serving 6.5 million residents. So it's a lot of ways in which content can really help people. And that's primarily what I think of as my job. But how did I get here? Starting out with a job, an undergraduate degree in English, basically. My undergraduate major was media narrative, but basically that consisted of English, communication, and journalism. I then went on to work in journalism, got an MFA in creative writing, and had broad experience in marketing, PR, development, and more. And I didn't think that I would ever work in tech, because I still had a flip phone well after everybody transitioned to Apple. But actually, in effect, that layered experience has actually built a roster of capabilities that have made me a much stronger strategist in my job. And so even though I wasn't highly technically savvy, I was able to use my skills that I built broadly from liberal arts in order to become much stronger at my job much more quickly. So for example, I understand the pitfalls of authoring and approvals from my time in publishing, right? I can work fast and lean from writing all those papers during my time working on an MFA. I'm able to sort of do a lot of planning and juggle a lot of balls in the air from working in nonprofit. I can sort of understand how to use storytelling and to bring people together through my time teaching or working in areas where I needed to do that. So for those of you who are thinking, well, I'm not technical, I don't spend all my time playing video games, I don't build websites, I don't know anything about code, you don't need to worry about that, because actually you do have a number of skills that are really sought after in the tech field, and actually that are growing in terms of being sought after in the tech field over and over again, day after day. And that's really why I'm here today, because I think it's very important for those of us who are sitting on the liberal arts side to understand our value and to understand how to leverage it, especially when we're thinking about how to use it for building a career within tech and to use it for content strategy. So let's start with the basics. And what exactly is content strategy? What do I do with my days, and why are people paying me to do it? Brief emoji react. If you all think you know what content strategy is, let me see if I can look here and see. Are there people here on our chat? They're saying, oh, I've got it. I know it. I feel like I know what a content strategy is. Not to worry at all. Noted content strategist and conversation designer Rachel Lovinger says that content strategy is simply using words and data to create unambiguous content that supports meaningful interactive experiences. So in a nutshell, content strategy is really just about getting the right information to the right people at the right time in order to support business needs and user goals. And so when you think actually about what you do whenever you're thinking through an English project or working on a creative project that uses the English language in order to convey a message, you are in some ways using some of the skills associated with content strategy in order to reach a goal, thinking about aim and audience. So you're already starting with the building blocks. What's different though, is that within content strategy, content roles within tech organizations address primarily what we call the user experience. Sometimes you'll hear it called UX, and they sit within the design organization. And so that might feel fuzzy if we're thinking about tech as zeros and ones and bits and AI, but I'm just going to give us a brief kind of 2-minute overview of the history of tech and why tech needs artists. So if you've never heard of UX, it's a set of practices developed to assure that products are built with user needs in mind, that they are optimized for how real people might interact with them, right? So where did we get here? How did we get here? Well, prior to the Industrial Revolution, craftspeople made each product by hand, and thus natural variances occurred. But the Industrial Revolution allowed and dictated that products be specifically designed so that they could be replicated by unskilled workers through a series of discrete actions, right? And with the advent of the Industrial Revolution, businesses began to replicate, measure, and work to improve performance of their employees and their product. So they started to think about how they could recreate experiences over and over again through design. In the 1920s, Daniel Starch was an ad man who developed the theory that successful advertising had to be heard, seen, remembered, and acted on to be effective. To test this theory, he began the practice of asking customers or users questions to determine if their ads were working. And market research blossomed, right? The idea that we're going back to the people that we want to impact and asking their opinion. In 1954, Fitts Law was developed, which says that a time for a user to interact with a target relates to two variables. Number one, the size of the target and the distance to the target. The bigger or closer the target, the faster a user can interact with it. This is actually supported in tech by a 2003 study that found the average width of the human finger is 45 to 57 pixels. So that means the smallest a button or a tab on a mobile device can be is 45 pixels. Otherwise, people have trouble taking the action. See, you're starting to see a pattern, right? We're going back to people, we're thinking about actions, we're trying to see what their behavior is really like. In the 1980s, within the field of tech, struggling Apple computers regained a foothold on the personal computer industry by focusing on design and user experience with its launch of the Macintosh. That effort returned so much value that Apple began investing heavily in making sure their products were beautiful and delivered a user experience that set them apart. And in the 1990s, Don Norman, who is the author of The Design of Everyday Things, joined Apple and coined the term to describe what he was doing, user experience, right? Helping them define how to make things beautiful and usable in order to drive business outcomes. In the late 90s, content strategy starts to appear within user experience as a discipline. In 2002, Anne Rockley published Managing Enterprise Content, a Unified Content Strategy. In 2007, Rachel Levinger published Content Strategy, the Philosophy of Data, that connected the idea that words should be informed by data. And in 2009, so not that long ago, Christina Halverson publishes Content Strategy for the Web, and the field explodes. Companies started seeing that in a world of apps and sites and mobile devices, in a climate that had gotten very, very noisy, having a strategy to think about how content was managed and disseminated was essential. So over time, that field really began to diversify and to gain a foothold, because people really realized that effective content isn't just nice to have. If done well, content can be the differentiator in driving value. Because the reality is 39% of users will end an interaction if it takes too long to complete. 8 seconds is the average number that a human gives a web interaction before moving on. And so when companies pay for content, they know that they are paying for it because it returns value. And I'm going to give you a little example of what I mean. So Significant Objects is a literary and anthropological experiment that was devised by Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn, and it demonstrated the effect of content on any given object's subjective value. And what it is the project purchased thrift store objects and then posted those objects on eBay, where the only change they made to them was to create a narrative about that object in the product description. The original average price for the object when they purchased it was about $1. But anchored in narrative and content, the objects took on additional meaning and people responded. After adding content that drove value, the average final price of each object was $162.50. That project took $197 and turned it into $8,000. That's a 6,300% profit margin just for attaching successful content to an object, right? So technical companies are understanding that there's tremendous value in leveraging those skills, and they're willing to pay for them. And as they have seen the value in those skills, that field has continued to evolve. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the evolution of the field, because what started essentially as just writing and being able to take data and words and attach meaning in order to drive business impact has exploded, changed, grown, shifted over time. Honestly, I've been in this field now since 2017, and every day actually we're coming up with new job titles or slightly shifting what people are doing within the field. So I feel like even when you all are getting out of school, things may have shifted a little bit more. It's just a really great time to be entering into this space, because new specializations are developing all the time. I'm what might be called a full stack content strategist, much in the way that there are full stack engineers, and that I've done kind of all the activities associated with content strategy and content. But the specializations that are developing really allow you to hone in on what parts of content, systems, planning, management you may be best at, and really dive into them. So maybe you like the editorial process of things, and so you want to sit more on that side. Maybe you really like structure, and you really want to think about how content is structured, and you want to sit on that side. Maybe you like interacting with people and testing and figuring out what works with them, and you want to sit on that side. The good news is, no matter what your skill set is, there is oftentimes a niche role for you that you can kind of dive into and sort of build your career within. Recently, for myself, I've gotten much more interested in conversation design, building the voice experiences. It's a growing, huge field. Like, there's so much that you can do in it. So we're going to talk a little bit about what some of those positions look like, some of the things you might do in them, some of the skill sets you might have for them. So the first one we're going to talk about is being a content designer. This is also sometimes called a UX writer or a technical writer. And this role really advocates for good design and shapes product experiences by crafting content that helps users complete a task, right? People in this role set the tone for content and drive cohesive product narratives across touch points. So what does this mean? What are some of the things you might do? Well, you might write micro copy. That's literally the calls to action or button copy that you'd see on a website. It's things like error states, right? When you get a 404 and you hit a broken link. It's instructional content like run books or guides, support docs. This is an example of a VA benefits guide that we drafted as part of our role as a content designer. So content designers are looking at how you're going to help users complete tasks through the words that you are creating. So some of the things that you might do in this role is create storyboards, right? And storyboards just allow teams to envision the path that a user will follow to fulfill an intent. They're not so much about the technology, but they're literally telling the story, like a comic book, of what steps they need and what language will need to guide them along that pathway. You might also do gap analysis, where you look at all the content that exists, look at the actions that need to happen, and find where the holes are and write to those holes. And you always are going to do some testing. We're going to go back to the user, if we remember our history of UX, and say, what does the user need in this instance? How can I modify what I have here in order to meet the user's needs? So user testing and interacting with users is really crucial in this role. And this role is really a good fit for you if you like to write in forms. So if you're the sort of person who really likes form poetry, if you really like when your research papers and your annotated bibliographies are just so, maybe you're a good fit if, as you've been watching this presentation, you've been making sure all my header styles are matching and that I'm kind of having parallelism across the presentation. And certainly if you can write quickly and you can iterate or revise based on feedback. So you can take the feedback that your professors are giving you and rewrite based on that feedback, this is a good role for you. So that's a good first role. And it's often a role that you see most often across tech. The next role, which again, I mentioned is evolving and is showing up all over the place now as people are sort of talking to things, right? We're talking to our refrigerators, we're talking to our cars, and conversation design roles are evolving in order to meet that need. And conversation designers, they develop the personas, dialogues, flows, and repairs needed for chatbots and voice user interfaces for those web experiences and for those products. So conversation designers are really creating the experiences of talking to a thing and making it feel like you're talking to a person. So they're creating the linguistic maps, they're doing the design and creating the personality, and they're designing the user journeys. And so they're really thinking about that experience. Some of the things you might do within the role as a conversation designer is a competitive analysis. That's where you look at what other companies are doing so you can learn from their mistake and take their good ideas. You're going to make flow diagrams, right? If we think about a conversation, it's turn taking, it's back and forth. You're going to make sure that you're sequencing those experiences so that they make sense and people aren't getting lost. And you're definitely going to make a lot of low fidelity prototypes so that you're sketching out your ideas in a way and testing the experience before you're spending money on actually coding it. So in conversation design, for example, a really fun low fidelity prototype that you do is called Wizard of Oz. And that is where you write out a series of dialogues and you literally will go behind a curtain and you will pretend to be the voice bot and you will have someone come in and they will engage in the experience with you. And you are only allowed to use your script, and you will very quickly find where your scripted responses are failing the experience, right? So it's a really low fidelity way to say, have I written enough? Have I considered all the parameters? Am I missing something about how people really interact with a system like this? For me, this is really valuable and interesting because I know I'm always screaming at my Alexa because she is not doing what I want her to do. So it's really an interesting process. And this is really a good fit for people who love to write stories and plays, who read about linguistics and think about the structure of language, and who a little bit aren't afraid of high-tech stuff like quantum computers and AI. As part of conversation design, you are going to do some training of your computer. You are going to do some machine learning. And so if that terrifies you, you don't necessarily always have to know that, but people in the room are going to talk about it. So you have to at least be able to not run away screaming when they talk about it. So that's conversation designer role. The next role we're going to talk about is the role that I currently have, which is content strategist. And this is really determining the content that an organization needs, how it should be surfaced to users, how it should be measured, and who should create it within an organization. So content strategists are doing a lot of things around needs mapping, trying to understand the needs of the user and the needs of the business. We're trying to audit the content and sort of see what exists and what's meeting goals. And we're trying to roadmap, which is basically sort of saying, if we're trying to get to a goal, what are all the phases of work that we need and how do we get there? So a lot of my work involves a lot of research. And that's where I'm either going out to leaders in the business and I'm talking to them, or I'm going out to our customers and I'm talking to them. I'm asking them a series of questions. I'm collecting all their responses, and then I'm synthesizing those responses in order to come up with insights that then we can act on. So it's a really good way for us to kind of aggregate responses and then distill them down to the things that we need to pay attention to, so that we make good and smart bets. And if you work in design, you'll see there's little Post-its here. We call them stickies oftentimes. Stickies are the bread and butter of people in design. They're everywhere. We do them virtually now, but my life is a lot of stickies. I do a lot of virtual sticking where I'm collecting a lot of things, I'm putting them together, I'm distilling the results, and then I'm making meaning out of them. I'm also visualizing relationships via ecosystem maps, right? So I'm saying, what does the system look like? Where does the customer sit within the system? What are the pain points there? Where can we fix things? What do we need to do in order to do that? And I'm always doing audits, which I'm looking at the current state against our goals, and I'm saying what improvements need to be made. So you'll notice that there's a theme of always saying, like, where we are now in the state that we're at, and where do we want to go to, and what are the steps that we need to take in order to get there, right? And that's basically what a strategy is. It brings together our visions, our goals, our tactics, and our measures. It's where we want to go and the plan for getting there. So that is my role. And it's definitely a good fit for people who like to think big picture. So if you remember back to my experience, I did a lot of planning. I did a lot of work in the past that had me bringing people together. And so it's a good fit for me in this role. It's good for people who can connect concepts and bring ideas back to data. So if you're the sort of person where you're doing a literature review and you like pulling in pieces from different books to sort of say, this is how this ladders up to themes, this might be a good role to you. Or you enjoy persuading people and balancing return on investment. Maybe your favorite thing to write are persuasive papers where you're aggregating all of your research and data to try and come up with a unique argument and get people on your side. Content strategy might be a great fit for you, right? Because you're just mainly trying to get people on your side so they'll act in service of your idea. Okay, there's two more roles we're going to talk about, and these are some of the newer roles. So the next one we're talking about is content engineering, sometimes also called an knowledge architect. And these are the people who oversee the structure of content and its interaction with the tools and technology within an organization. So you'll see there's a visual here that says the grand taxonomy of rap names. This is like a funny little visual for people who love taxonomy. People who do content engineering are looking at things like content models, that's structuring content, literally breaking apart a page of content and saying, what are the pieces of this and how can they be replicated again and again in order to create an experience? They're looking at information architectures. They're looking at taxonomy, which is basically just a fancy word for categorizing things into buckets and naming those buckets. And they're looking at knowledge management, which is how we're kind of linking those categories within a data model. So it's a more technical side of the work. And they're definitely more thinking of the way of structuring information. So they might create information architectures, thinking both about the browsing experience, how you're clicking through a website. Are you going from parent to child to grandchild, clicking through? Are you using filters in order to get where you want, like you might on a Zappos or on an Amazon experience? Are you primarily going through search to arrive at a result? What does that look like in terms of interacting with the data behind the system? How are we breaking apart the data within the content model itself, and how does that data relate to itself? So this is an example of a content model. You'll see how these items that might sit within a given piece of content are related to one another. And then sort of breaking apart systems of classification, right? So these are people who are definitely loving spreadsheets and models. They might know their way around an API, thinking about how we're connecting ideas around language to ideas around data. And they're people who like design systems that improve efficiency. I often say on the English language side, the people I know who work as content engineers now, they were the people who in grammar school, when you had to diagram sentences, they love that. They just love diagramming sentences. So that's sort of the niche that those people fit into, right? They just love to break apart language, to think about how it can be put back together like pieces of a puzzle and be reused most effectively. So that's really a good fit for people on that side. So maybe you're not a lyrical writer who writes poetry, but you really think about language in a different way. Content engineering could be a good position for you. And the last role that we're going to talk about is content operations. And these are people who provide guidance for the planning, creation, maintenance, and deprecation of content across the enterprise. So they really think about the people and process side of things. They're thinking about the authoring needs like workflows, permissions, and guidance. They're thinking about standards. How are we creating continuity in voice, tone, and style? And they're thinking about governance, which is basically the care and feeding of content. And people who are working across content operations are doing things like creating the systems that make sure when I come to a website or a digital magazine or an app over and over again, that it looks and feels the same every single time, right? So this is an example. I put together the digital standards for the city of Philadelphia. We were looking at things like our writing style. What is our common usage? How are we punctuating? Are we capitalizing titles? Is there a certain way that we're referring to departments? How are we thinking about the way that we refer to groups of people, right? We want it to sound the same because people will associate us with that product again and again, and that's part of the content experience. But people working in content operations are also thinking about the back end. They're thinking about the workflows and the governance for the people who are making the content. So this is an example of a workflow that's created in order to author content. Anybody who's ever maybe worked on the literary magazine for school or been part of any kind of editorial process knows it's not just as easy as writing something and putting it out in the world. Oftentimes people have to review it. They have feedback. There's an editorial process. You have to look at it. Who gets to decide? When is it done? Actually putting that down on paper and determining that so it can be repeated is essential for businesses, and making sure that that's clear for everyone is really a full-time job. And so people who work in content operations are responsible for determining that. So naturally, you're a good fit for that role if you've never met a process you didn't want to improve, right? If you're a stickler for keeping everything the same, maybe across your papers, I know probably you might all be doing MLA style, or maybe you're doing Chicago style, but that's your favorite part, right? It's no brainer for you. You don't have to think about it. You just love it. Your annotated bibliographies are always perfectly on point. Like, this is a great role for you. And you like to help others learn. There's a big training component in this because you want others to feel empowered to do this work well. And that's a big part of your role. And so it's a good fit for you to do that role. And again, people in content operations may do some day-to-day actual writing of the words, but oftentimes they're more thinking about the back-end processes, which just goes to show that you don't necessarily have to be somebody who was thinking about writing the great American novel and then maybe decided that wasn't for you because, you want to be able to pay rent and raise your family, and that's not always possible nowadays. That there's a bunch of different roles and operations for you that you can take on that aren't necessarily all rooted in either I'm a writer or I'm a teacher or I work in advertising and marketing. There's a lot of different skills that you can leverage within the field, and it's really valuable to be able to lean into those. So that brings us to sort of my last little section, which is how to get started. Maybe some of you are thinking, okay, this doesn't feel like a fit. Completely fine. I think there are other sessions in this series for you to see if there are other positions that will work for you. But maybe some are thinking, this is great. I just came from my company. Atlassian is an international company based out of Australia, but we have offices all around the world. And I just came from a company on site in Austin where I, got to have my iced lattes every day with the dogs in the office and the ping pong tables and all the tech perks that come with it. Maybe some of you are like, sign me up. That's what I want. Well, the good news is it doesn't need to be a struggle, right? Isn't really, sometimes it can feel like, well, this is a really painful and terrifying thing in terms of getting started. As was mentioned, I really started my career working in journalism and fashion journalism, and it felt terrifying to me to figure out how to make that first step and connect. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot of ways that you can get started right now with what you're already doing. And the first thing is really start by gathering examples from your own life of applicable projects. And you can just put them in a Google Drive folder, or you can make an easy online portfolio. WordPress has some basic templates that you can use and make a website for yourself. So maybe you're thinking, wow, I really love the idea of being a content designer, and I've been doing some work on a guide and a process guide. I'm going to take that and put that together. Or, hey, I am the editor of my school's literary magazine, so it feels like content operations are really a fit for me. I'm going to share the process I developed for all my editors to kind of review all our submissions, and I'm going to put that aside, right? Start gathering things that you're doing right now from your own life that you could put together as case studies to show that you are practicing the skills. Number 2 is read and learn. I mentioned this is a growing field, and there are lots of articles, books, podcasts, and more on content strategy. Many of them are free, right? There's always something new to learn. Number 3 is volunteer. So I know y'all are in Tennessee. There might not be a local Code 4 group, but if there is, you can join a Code 4 group, which is really just a hackathon group where people come together and build stuff. They literally hack together an app in a weekend. But if you don't have a local Code 4 group, ask your university if you can help them improve their website. Reach out to a nonprofit and say, hey, I know that you've got a development campaign going on. I'd love to take a look at how we could improve the content on your letters and on the postcards that you send out to see if we can make a return on investment, right? Find those connections and those ways to volunteer. There are lots of people that need help on content because it is something that often is deprioritized in many organizations. And so there's lots of ways that you can sort of make an impact and build a case study for yourself. And finally, make connections. You can join user experience, content strategy, and conversation design Slack channels. And some conferences like Button offers scholarships to people that are still in school. So you can actually go for free to virtual or in-person conferences to meet people. This, again, is a field that is new and growing, and it is surprisingly open. So I mentioned early on that Christina Halverson in 2009 wrote content strategy for the web. I know Christina Halverson, she's easily accessible. I mentioned that conversation design is something that I'm fascinated with. Well, Kathy Pearl, who's the head of conversation design at Google, she's part of a UX Slack design group that I'm part of, and she regularly chats with people. You know, she's open, she's lovely, she's a wonderful person to talk to. So unlike maybe trying to break into Hollywood, this is something where you can really quickly get involved in the community, start talking to people, start asking them questions, and get some feedback to make the connections that you need in order to get involved. So that's really valuable. I'm going to share this deck as well afterwards, and it has links to some references and resources, but there is a Women in Voice group that you can join. So for women interested in conversation design, it's incredibly supportive. Again, content strategy for the web, nicely said, are wonderful books. Content and UX Slack group actually has a new to content strategy sub channel that you can join. And for those of you, because I know it's a mix of undergrad and graduates here who might be watching, my company Atlassian has an internship and new grad program. So let me just tell you a little bit about this. Our internship program is for rising seniors, so people who are juniors and rising into their senior year. I'll share the link again with the Professor's Wallace so you can take a look at the available internships and see if anything applies. But if you do see a role that you like, you can apply for it. You'd be highly supportive. You'll be flown out to an internship cohort program, likely in San Francisco, and you'll be given a lot of support. And the new grad program is for people who are within 2 years of graduation, who have not had significant previous employment. And again, new grads are given a lot of support to enter into technology. I personally work on a team right now with Erica, who entered into design via the new grad program. She still is really friends with all of the other new grads, and it was a great way for her to kind of jumpstart her way into a career in tech. So I'm happy to share those resources, and also to be a resource if people want to follow up or ask any questions about that. But other tech companies as well have similar programs that you can reach out to as well. So I really do think, as content strategist Satish Hopal says, that content is cause and behavior is the effect. And it's really that, in content strategy, we talk about the call to action, or CTA. And maybe for some of you, this session will be the call to action that sets you on a new course for a new career. And if so, I'm really happy to help in any way I can. And I hope that this has been informative. And I'm happy now to answer any questions that you might have. And I will stop sharing my screen so I can look at all your faces too, if you unmute. But Jeni, I don't know if you want to read questions in line.
Yeah, I'm happy to call out any questions people have. So please feel free to pop them in the chat. Don't be shy. Arin has offered to speak to people offline afterwards, but just like we say in class, if you have the question, other people probably do too. So please don't be shy and don't hesitate to share it here. And while we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, I thought I would just go ahead and just clarify a few things. The new grad program, is that only for graduates graduating from undergrad, or do people finishing a graduate degree, would they qualify for that as well?
Potentially, those graduating from graduate school could qualify as well. So it's worthwhile looking into it and seeing if there's a role that fits and reaching out. The only caveat is generally if you have more than 2 years working experience, they sort of say no. So a lot of times grad students will go work and then come into grad school. So that's the one thing to consider it.
Okay, so that'll be useful and helpful information for everyone. Something else I wanted to just sort of talk about a little bit is you mentioned a lot of resources there, and we'll make sure everyone will get them. Melanie, I see that you're asking where we will post that information. And I think that Daniel can chime in if there's I think that we can email it to the grad students listserv, and I will certainly make sure it's available in my class as well for those of you joining from my class. And you can also reach out to Daniel and I via email for follow-up. I'm popping my email in the chat right now. But one thing I was struck by when you were talking about sort of next steps here at the end is that there are a lot of action items there. And two, I want to make sure everyone knows what Slack is, because I know from my classes, not everyone knows what Slack is. So do you want to tell us, just to sort of clarify that for a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Slack is an instant messaging platform that is very popular in the tech industry, where you can join what are called groups, and then you communicate via channels within the groups. So you can oftentimes search for Slack channels, and then you have to be either invited or request to be invited into those groups. And then you can chat about all kinds of topics. And so it's really useful. We don't use email in my company at all. We just Slack each other all day long across numbers of channels. So it's a way to kind of IM each other all day long. And many organizations or groups within tech industries use it in order to communicate.
And not just tech, a lot of companies and corporations and even nonprofits are starting to use Slack for in-house communication. So it is something we talk about, at least in my business writing class, as something that you probably need to get familiar with. But I was struck by the kind of proactive steps there, which some English majors maybe feel a little shy about. And we just, you know, the average description of an English major would be, I'm introverted and I like books and reading and that sort of thing. How would you talk about that? How, you know, does that mean these are still good fits for people who have those inclinations? And can you say a little bit more about that?
100%. I mean, most of the people that I work with, especially since this field is so new, their history is much like mine. So they came from library sciences, or they came from journalism, or they were English teachers themselves, or they liked to write but worked in the marketing side and then moved over. So I think that there is a lot of room for people who might not be extroverted, or might not be sort of the people in the room who feel like they're the grand persuaders, to do work. And especially roles like content engineering, you're often in a small group or by yourself doing a lot of deep thinking with spreadsheets and models. You know, you're doing a lot of research on your own. So it's a very kind of quiet role. Taxonomists, I'm working with a taxonomist right now. She was an archivist who spent time in the National Archives prior to her move into taxonomy. So she was literally in the basement of the National Archives for many years by herself. And so I think there's a role for everyone. In terms of, you just need to be able to have a passion about the value that information holds in getting people access to be able to do things. And whether you do that from the system side or you do that from the beauty of the language side, there's a role for people.
And just sort of following on from that, I know that you work from home now, but as you pointed out, you work for a global company. What do you think the division for these types of jobs on the whole are, and especially going forward with all of the changes in the last few years? Do you think it's a more work from home or Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think tech, of course, is the vanguard in terms of a fully distributed workforce, and very few firms within the field of tech are requiring everyone to be in person. And so I think there is a lot of potential in terms of if you have a family or you want to have a family and locate yourself in a location where you might not think is a hub or a center. Again, previously working in fashion, there's only one place to work in fashion, and that place is New York City. And so it really limits you. But I moved to Florida in the middle of the pandemic, and I did not change my job. My company has a policy even where right now I am working out of Florida, but I can work anywhere in the world for up to 90 days without letting them know, as long as I'm co-locating. And so there is a lot of flexibility in tech in terms of not just where you start to work, but how you work on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. I have coworkers, one of my coworkers went on vacation to Bali for a month and a half, and then part of it, she decided she would log in and do some work. So she managed to have an extended vacation in Bali where she kind of logged in and did a little bit of work for a week and a half of it. But then she was in Bali, she went to Hawaii and then logged in for a couple days in Hawaii. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you spend your time and where you go. And I think also, again, coming from nonprofit, just there's a lot of benefits and a lot of mobility within this field to be able to grow. I have a learning budget. I have a budget for health and wellness every year. I have a charitable giving match. I have financial advisement. I have fully paid health insurance for every single member of my family. So it offers you a lot of things that other fields maybe it's more challenging to get. So there's a lot more flexibility.
Sally Harris is asking in the chat how that flexibility has affected productivity.
To me, I think it doesn't impact productivity. I think, if it is a good company, it is putting in place the systems that allow people to do work remotely or otherwise. I would say, as people who are new in the field, when you are thinking about your first position, definitely questions I would ask are, what structures are you having in place for supporting people new in the field? Because that is the time where maybe, right, you're not as self-starting. You can be in the place where you're thinking like, I'm not sure what to do. Should I jump in? Where's the space? So really confirming that they have the structures in place to support you are good questions to ask. But everyone that I work with, we hop into Zoom meetings just like this. We Slack each other all day. We have time to work on our own. We have deadlines like every other project. And then we meet in person when that's necessary in order to kind of do that deep thinking where you just kind of need to draw on a paper next to each other. So it seems to me like the productivity hasn't really changed much. And in some ways, although I, as an extrovert, miss this, there's more productivity because you don't get to have those, like, let's stand over a box of donuts for 45 minutes and just chat about our weekends. That doesn't happen as much, but you do get opportunities to chat with each other, but it's just not in the same way.
So I'm going to ask you, I just made a couple of notes while you were talking, and you mentioned the term pain point, which is something else I talk about in my classes, sometimes more than others. So do you want to talk about what that is a little bit more and how content design reacts to it, embraces it, responds?
Yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes in design, we're looking for either opportunities or we're looking at pain points. And opportunities are spaces where people are responding positively and we can lean in and build into that experience. And pain points is where users are experiencing friction and they're not happy. So we all have had this experience where maybe you have ordered something online and it didn't come, and you try to click into the chat bot to get it resolved, and you're just in an endless loop, and you're frustrated and you're frustrated and you're frustrated, that's a pain point for you, right? And it is actually eroding your trust in the brand and the company. And it's not just about the resolution of the action for you, it's actually creating a ripple effect. There's actually a statistic that says that if content is hard to find, even when customers find that content, they will rate it as 53% less accurate than if it were easy to find in the first place, right? So there's a pain point there, and making content easy to find means that it's more effective in the end. So we want to lean into those pain points and try and resolve them in order to make sure that customers have a better experience, which from my vantage point is the most important thing, but ultimately to make sure too that the business succeeds.
I also really liked that you shared the quote about the right info with the right people at the right time to support goals. I feel like that can apply to a lot of different things. And I hope it applies to, I hope this is the right information at the right time for some of you that have been watching. And so I also want to make that the Easter egg for any of my students who are watching: the right info at the right time and the right people to support your goals. So you're going to use that in a piece of writing for this weekend. Any final questions for Arin? I feel very passionately that there are a lot of opportunities for English majors out there, and I get really upset when I hear people talking about how English jobs are not good jobs, because we are in demand. And now you know you're in demand. So I hope that you feel excited about what you've done. I know being in school, being in grad school can be really hard, and it's easy to get discouraged. And it's, you know, you push the whole time to get close to graduation, and then graduation comes and you're like, what am I going to do now? But hopefully this helps give you some ideas, and you can look at some people who are successful and know that there is an exciting opportunity out there for you. And this is a good time to be an English major. So if you have any questions, I put my email in the chat. Daniel can drop his email in the chat as well. Feel free to reach out to either of us. Arin's going to share her slides. We're happy to share them with anybody who asks. Just send us an email. Any other materials you want or questions you want to follow up with, let me know. And I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Ms. Arin Black in particular for coming and sharing this very interesting presentation with us today. And also telling us about internship opportunities, which is just like bonus. And these are really cool internship opportunities. So I hope that some of you can take advantage of them.
Yes, yes, and I will add that they are, because it's tech, unlike some, they are paid. They are paid. I put the link to the internship in the chat. And the one last thing I'll say for you all, it is true that English majors are in demand. One of the things I will say for myself is, because I work with a lot of computer people who sit on the other side of things and like algorithm and math, they don't have my skill set. And so I'm actually quite in demands where I work because I'm the rarity. And so that is a real benefit and a bonus, and something that you can lean into and feel good about. The ability to clearly articulate a position or an argument is something that is incredibly valuable, and is really, really something that you can use whether you choose a job in tech or a job in any other field. So.
And it's not as common as you think. When we swim in English circles, I think we tend to think that everyone is good at the things that we are good at, but that's a bubble. And it's not like that, you know, out there in the workforce. You really do have skills that you can build on and leverage and capitalize on. And you know, the narrative and the story that you are able to tell with your skills, that I think every English graduate, you know, can use those skills so that we have. So again, thank you all so much. And I I think there are 2 more talks planned. So watch your email for that information. If you're one of my students joining me, you're interested in hearing about more of these job talks, just let me know. Send me an email. And have a great afternoon, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.